In the early 90s, the Game Boy was on top of the world, and Sega wanted to compete with the console with their own handheld, the Game Gear. But in order to get more consumers interested in the console, a studio called Ancient was tasked with creating a Sonic game for it. They started out making a version of Sonic 1 for the Game Gear, but it didn't stop there. Many more were released afterwards. Some were Game Gear exclusive, and some were ported to Sega's second home console, the Master System. In this video, I'll be taking a brief look at the 8-bit versions of Sonic 1 and 2, as well as Sonic Chaos and Triple Trouble. Let's dive in. The Sonic 1 on Master System is pretty neat. Instead of trying to replicate the Genesis original on inferior hardware, the team over at Ancient decided to make something that stood on its own. Sure, 3 levels in this game are taken from the original, but that's only in terms of the visuals, all things considered. The level design itself is very different. Since the Master System and Game Gear couldn't handle such a blistering speed, this game is more of a standard 2D side-scroller. The levels are built around hopping from platform to platform and avoiding bottomless pits. There aren't any loops or tunnels to speak of here, since they couldn't quite replicate the original's physics on this hardware. I can kind of commend them for doing this though. They didn't try making something they didn't know how to. In fact, since some of the zones are entirely original and all the level design and gimmicks are brand new, it does feel like its own game. I think on its own, Sonic 1 on Master System is fairly solid. The levels are well paced and are decently designed. I was thoroughly engaged throughout my playthrough. There aren't too many branching paths in these levels, which isn't a big deal to me since, for one, I never really explore in Sonic games that much, and second, this game is very simple, so it didn't really need big levels. The only times you'll really need to find the secrets is to find a Chaos Emerald, since they're found out in the open in this game. These zones are all fairly straightforward. They each have their own little gimmick and they stick with it. Bridge Zone has collapsing platforms, as well as an auto-scrolling stage, cause that was a good idea. Jungle Zone has a lot of vertical platforming, which is cool, even though when the screen scrolls up, whatever is below you is considered bottomless even if there's ground right beneath you. It's pretty dumb, and it honestly feels like a major oversight on the developer's part because it's pretty unfair, though this isn't the case in the Game Gear version. Overall, I think these zones are competent and accomplish what they set out to do. The only one I didn't like is this game's take on Labyrinth Zone. It's a crappy slow-paced water level. I know it, you know it, so I don't need to tell you why it sucks. Sonic himself doesn't feel the best to control, but it's certainly manageable. He's super floaty and his momentum can feel a bit wonky. I think it works out though, since the levels felt like they were designed to accommodate for the controls, except for the aforementioned water level, since it makes it feel even more sluggish and awkward. But really, 9 times out of 10, the controls are perfectly fine and work in the game's favor. Oddly enough though, you can't pick up your rings after you get hit, which is very strange. It's a series staple after all, so I don't know why it was removed. Speaking of rings though, you're never given any rings before a boss fight in this game, making things more artificially difficult. But hey, the game is still playable nonetheless. Graphically speaking, this game actually looks really nice for an 8-bit game. The sprite work is very detailed and the environments have a pleasing look and nice color palettes. Jungle Zone especially looks fantastic with all the trees and waterfalls. Though, in the Game Gear version, Sonic doesn't have a nose, which is kind of funny and unsettling. As for the music, I wasn't the biggest fan, honestly. I get this soundtrack has a lot of fans, and I will say the actual melodies are very nice. It's just that they lack a bit of a punch is all. It was pleasant, just nothing I'd go back to at all. Overall, I thought this game was fairly decent. Nothing mind-blowing, but nothing awful either. Just good, simple fun. It would have been really neat to have this on the Game Gear back in the day, and I can certainly appreciate how it feels like its own separate thing from the Genesis original. Though the game was kinda bland in places, which is its biggest fault. But if you're a Sonic fan, it wouldn't hurt to give this a shot. If not though, there are better things you could do in an hour, but you could certainly do much worse. The 8-bit version of Sonic 2 is one of the more infamous games I'll be talking about in this video. People detest the Game Gear version for its unfair difficulty caused by the smaller screen resolution. While I haven't played this version in that much, judging by some gameplay, it doesn't look very good at all. And that's coming from someone who really doesn't have a problem with screen crunch most of the time. But I digress. This game actually predates its Genesis counterpart by less than a month, making this Tails' first appearance. What's most interesting about this game is that it shares absolutely no zones with the Genesis version. Each level is completely original, aside from Green Hills zone. Very creative. But everything else is exclusive to this game, which is nice to see. However, there are way more gimmicks in this game that you have to directly interact with this time around. Some of them are fine, like these mine carts, but the rest kinda blow. Take the hang glider for example. A fun idea, sure, but it's very unintuitive to use, making everything way more awkward than it needs to be. Same with these air bubbles you have to float around in during parts of Aqua Lake Zone. For one, it's very slow, and second, you're forced to maneuver through some very tight spaces without popping it. This results in a lot of trial and error. Oh yeah, that's another thing. This game is riddled with trial and error design. Like I said with the hang glider, it's very hard to control, so you'll most likely screw up and die several times and have to do it over and over again. And then in Aqua Lake Zone, you just have to know where all the hazards are so you don't pop the bubble. And then in Scrambled Egg Zone, you're going to be entering and re-entering these tubes over and over again, trying to find the correct path. This kind of design extends to the boss fights as well. You're once again not given any rings before the boss. Now, the fights aren't particularly hard, it's just that it can take a little bit to get their pattern down, so you're bound to die at least once. All of this makes this game a bit of a chore sometimes and can completely kill the game's pace. Granted, there are a few improvements like how Sonic can actually pick up his rings after he gets hit, but that doesn't really help anything. The visuals are a bit mixed as well. Some zones look very bland like Underground Zone, but some look fantastic. I really love the aesthetic of Aqua Lake, and Sky High Zone looks pretty nice. The music wasn't much to write home about yet again. Like I said with Sonic 1, the actual melodies are fine enough, if it bland sometimes, but the songs just don't have much bite is all. However, there is one very interesting thing regarding one of the tracks. See, the song that plays in Green Hills would later be used as the basis for the theme of Sonic's CD in Japan, You Can Do Anything, which is pretty dang cool. Now before I wrap up, I want to mention the most infamous part of 8-Bit Sonic 2, the ending. So the whole plot of this game isn't just about rescuing the animals. Robotnik also kidnapped Tails, so you have to go rescue him. But you have to collect all the Chaos Emeralds to access the final zone and fight Robotnik, thus saving Tails. But if you don't get the Chaos Emeralds, the game ends very abruptly after you defeat Silver Sonic. Then, at the end of the credits, this is shown to you. Most people assume that Tails, died. Tails died. He's dead. It's your fault. Game over. Yeah, that totally won't traumatize any little kids. It's fine. So yeah, I didn't really think this game was anything too special. It does have some good ideas, but they weren't executed very well at all. All the new gimmicks just felt extremely unpolished, and the general level design relied too much on trial and error, making this game just a below average experience. I wouldn't recommend this if you're not a Sonic fan. So here's the first of these games with an original title, Sonic Chaos. But in Japan, however, this game was called Sonic and Tails. This, of course, implies that you can play as Tails. He controls pretty much the same as Sonic, but he can use his signature flying ability, although it's very sluggish. This game definitely feels like a technical update from 1 and 2. The physics feel a bit tighter, the spin dash has finally been added, and visually speaking it's very nice. A good amount of detail has been added to the environments and the colors used work very well. Sonic Sprite got a really nice update as well. It's good stuff. Same with the music. The compositions are more layered and have more punch, which is nice to hear. Like there's actually prominent rhythm sections in the tracks, giving them a fuller sound. Well, as full as you can get on the Master System. Though the melodies were still better in 1 and 2, I'd say. But in terms of the gameplay itself, good lord, this game is so insultingly easy and short. It's crazy. Like there's hardly anything here to talk about because a lot of the levels barely last a single minute. I'm not kidding. Most of the levels end before they get going and barely challenge you whatsoever. Like every time I reach the end of an act, I got a bit of a whiplash because of how abrupt it is. Now, this game isn't bad at all, but geez, it's so lifeless. None of the levels here do anything particularly special or cool. They just exist. That's it. The whole game is very one note the whole way through and it doesn't leave a lasting impression at all. I don't even know what to say about this game because there's nothing to say. I mean, I guess the new spring item and rocket shoes are pretty cool, but they're very underutilized outside of the special stages. These are accessed by collecting 100 rings in the level, and while I didn't bother playing them because I'm lazy, I've heard that this is where the actual challenge of this game lies. Sonic Chaos is a polished game, but it just has no merit behind it, and there's like no reason to go back and play it now. To make matters worse, this thing was $30 back in the day, which equates to $60 now. $60 for a shallow game you can 100% in 40 minutes. I don't think there's any reason you should really play this due to its stupidly low difficulty and short length. I mean, maybe you'd have fun with it if you've never played a video game before. But if that's the case, then why are you watching this? Sonic Triple Trouble is the first and only game in this video to have been released exclusively on the Game Gear, which makes sense. It was released in 1994, so the Master System had died out by then, at least in America. But because people have way too much time on their hands, a Master System port has been made by fans, which is how I decided to play it. The only flaw of this version is that there are several graphical glitches, but it's nothing too bad. Though I would like to note, since this game was made from the ground up for the Game Gear, it feels pretty good to play on it, so it's not a bad option if you decide to play it. This game was also called Sonic and Tails 2 over in Japan, making Chaos and Triple Trouble a duology over there. This game includes 3 villains, hence the name Triple Trouble. You have Dr. Robotnik as per usual, Knuckles makes his Game Gear debut, and will get in your way just like in Sonic 3. And then there's Fang the Sniper, who is on the hunt for the Chaos Emeralds. I really like his design, but sadly he's become one of the more forgotten characters in the series. From a visual standpoint, Triple Trouble is actually very impressive for an 8-bit game. While some levels do look a bit busy, but most of the time the game looks great. The soundtrack is alright, there are certainly some great melodies throughout, but it's nothing too remarkable really. And then as for the level design, it's fairly solid. There's actually a good amount of speed present in this game, which is nice to see, even if it doesn't feel the best because of the hardware. There's plenty of loops and slopes all over the place, making these levels feel a bit more like the Genesis games to a degree. Sonic Chaos did have a decent sense of speed, but you know. The rocket shoes and spring item return from Chaos, and the bubble, as well as the minecart, make a comeback from Sonic 2. The only new power-up here were these shoes that let you swim through the water really fast, which is pretty cool. I also really liked how the snowboard was used in Robotnik Winter Zone. Instead of being more automated like it was in Sonic 3, you can actually control Sonic while he's on the board, and it's a ton of fun. In fact, the first 4 zones in this game are a lot of fun. Great Turquoise Zone is a nice opening stage, a Sunset Park has the fun minecarts, Meta Jungle Era is very well paced, and the aforementioned Robotnik Winter Zone is good fun. I'd say Jungle Era is my favorite zone in the game. I like the barrel gimmick, the visuals are stellar, and has a tight pace to boot like I said. Unfortunately, the last two zones kinda suck. One of them is of course a water level, so it's obviously gonna be a slog to get through. But then we have Atomic Destroyer Zone, which is just poorly designed in general. It involves you having to go through these tubes in order to travel through the zone. Jeez, what is it with these games and tubes? Anyway, the problem is that half the time you'll think you're going the right way, only to find yourself back to somewhere you were before. It's extremely obnoxious and makes the zone overstay its welcome big time. Although you do get to fight Metal Sonic at the end, but that's pretty cool at least. And sure, these are only 2 of the 6 zones in this game, but because of how they can drag on, it knocks the game down a peg for me. But don't get me wrong, it's a polished game with some good ideas, but like a lot of the other games I talked about, it's fairly underwhelming. Though I can see why people do like Triple Trouble a lot. It does have a certain kind of charm to it that could be appealing to some. So there you have it, that's all the main 8-bit Sonic games. My favorite of the bunch was probably 8-bit Sonic 1, followed by Triple Trouble, then Chaos, and finally 8-bit Sonic 2 being the worst. Though it was more interesting than Chaos, it was still more of a slog to play through. And with Sonic 1, I think it really thrived on its simplicity. It knew what it wanted to be, and it didn't try too hard, which I think led to it being more enjoyable than the rest. Plus, its more straightforward design sort of made it stand out in like a weird way. Though if for some reason you want to play a classic Sonic game on inferior hardware, play Pocket Adventure. It's very fun, the controls are smooth as butter, and the visuals are very pleasing. I did a full review of it a few months ago, so you can check that out if you want to learn more. As for the games in question though, I can recommend 8-bit Sonic 1 and Triple Trouble if you want some decent retro action. But with 8-bit Sonic 2 and Chaos, I can really only recommend them if you're a big Sonic fan like me. 2 is very unpolished and Chaos barely has any substance to speak of. You can find all these games except Chaos on the 3DS eShop if you want to give them a shot. Just know that they won't be the greatest thing in the world.
Amazingly, the universe began in chaos. Things were fast. It was cool. Over the years, that chaos would take many forms. But one thing it's never become is portable. Introducing new Sonic Chaos for Game Gear. Chaos with rocket shoes. Chaos with pogo springs. Chaos with Sonic or Tails. Chaos improved. New Sonic Chaos only on Sega Game Gear.